Hey, welcome back to the Dynasty Grind. My name is Peter Howard at PA Howdy on Twitter and Threads and everywhere else you might need an at that I happen to be anyway. I mean, I'm not there. You won't find me at PA Howdy if you're on Kafloople or whatever's new. I don't know the new things. Took a week off last week. Didn't really announce it, mainly because we got 30 people, so you'll mostly know what's going on. If not, also just because I didn't see it coming, and towards the end of the week I get hit with a bout of illness, should we say, and just failed to coordinate with Zach or Dynasty at House to see if they could do a show in my absence. And so I basically told them on Tuesday that, hey, I forgot, I'm not going to be there because I'm going to go to my live Scott Fishbowl draft. So that's what happened there. But we are back this week. We do try and do a show every week. That's the first one we've missed, as memory serves, for about 2 years now. But yeah, every Wednesday at 9:30, we tend to do a stream until everyone gets bored or we run out of comments or we get tired, and where we talk about anything Dynasty or fantasy football related. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, or just subjects you want us to talk with you about, and drop in whatever comment box, whatever streaming platform we happen to be on, because I seriously don't remember, and I see a whole bunch of new symbols up there that I don't know what they mean, but we go to a few apparently. Whatever box they give you, drop them in that box. We do work through it democratically, so the first one that turns up in IQ, we do that one first, and the second one we do second. There's no real way to skip the line. I know people have donated in the past thinking that will prioritize, and that would make sense if we were, in any way organized at this, but we're just 2 or 3 Dynasty nerds who like to talk with other Dynasty nerds about fantasy football, and we're not really into the whole professional monetization thing. So that's the way it works. We're really looking forward to talking with you all, and on the Wednesday night about Dynasty, and maybe see if we can learn some stuff around the Scott Fishbowl, even if we're not in or we don't care about the Scott Fishbowl particularly. I think there are edges that some people are missing the trick on because they're too much focusing on the fact they don't play in the league or they're not interested in the league to see. And that's been my main takeaway. I've improved this week, I think, in Dynasty because of some of the advantages of the Scott Fishbowl, whether I was playing in it or not. And I think that's really interesting. But let's see what you think. My DMs still aren't working. Twitter's broken again in a new way. What's up, Zach? How are you?
I'm good, Peter. I'm glad we're back. It's nice to see people out there in the chat. You mentioned if you're not in the Scott Fishbowl, you may not care about the Scott Fishbowl. There are satellite leagues already set up for the Scott Fishbowl. So, everyone can get in and get after it, even if they're not in the main event. That's how I started in the Scott Fishbowl. I was in a satellite for SFB.
I started in a satellite, and I was doing this. Pretty popular, I feel like, as far as I go, for a couple years before I even thought to, before I was even in. And I can't help feeling, while there might be valid complaints about it, I don't want this on my timeline, I really don't understand most of them, because there's a whole bunch of stuff on my timeline these days I have no interest in. And I just keep on scrolling. But also, like, those first few years before I played, I found it a remarkably interesting time. Like, the people I'd found that I respected and thought were better than me, and still think are better than me, literally go through how they play Dynasty, essentially, because preparing for Scott Fishbowl is remarkably Dynasty-like, and step by step in a new format. So you had got to look at it in an entirely new way, sans your league. And then you could see how they were applying it to a league that you actually play in. Like, that was fascinating to me. It's how I first started to build, quote unquote, a process. And I really think missing, if that's your focus, I really think you're missing a trick. But you're right. The only reason not to play in the Scott Fishbowl is you don't want to, which is perfectly fine. But between satellite leagues and the fact they desperately want you in the Scott Fishbowl, all you need to do is take part a little bit, share a tweet, get involved in the chat, talk with people about it when that is going on. And if you want to get in, the paths to getting in are infinite. Because everyone I know, and I don't know a few anymore, that are involved in it, like, all they want is to include more people. They want more people included. So that's not a barrier.
Yeah, and that's the thing is just is if you're
I mean,
not
like,
in, be involved and be around and be a part of it and like there are so many avenues to be a part of it and to eventually gain an invite that it's don't sit there and pout if you didn't get in, because there are literally 45,000 people waiting right now to like maybe get in if somebody gets booted because they don't make a pick in the first round. Like so it can't be big enough to fit everybody. It's just not feasibly it's just not feasible. But also there are other avenues where like everybody can be included, even if you're like satellite, so you're on the periphery but you're still like involved in it. You're still involved in doing good, which is really the main focus of the Scott Fish Bowl. And I know that like it's this really cool tournament. You get to play with a bunch of celebrities and then a whole bunch of other fantasy analysts and that sort of thing. Like that's awesome. It's cool. It's a really big deal. But thinking of it that way, you're missing the forest for the trees. Like I think if you take a step back and realize that it's about the charity, it's about the community, it's about everybody being able to get together and do something great, then you're a lot further ahead if you can see it that way. Anyway,
they're also smaller, but maybe more preferable. Like I take part in the Biscuit Bowl every year. Not many people you don't get Scott Fish Bowl attention, but all the money for that is Scott Fish Bowl like tournament, but all the money goes to animal charities, which is personally close to my heart.
Yeah.
And so there's that, and like, there's a whole bunch of ways to get involved in things like that. If something about Scott Fish Bowl isn't your style, but I seriously mean it. Just as every waking thought goes to, how can I apply this to my dynasty team? Like I meet new people that are interesting to follow. That article that I was talking about on Twitter today is written by a guy I didn't follow. I'd never heard of him before. He's a football guy's writer, so he must be someone, but I didn't know him. And I thought his process was remarkably similar to my own, with a few things that, I don't do. And I was like, I want to go look at that. So I went and followed him. I've now spoken to him, and I look forward to seeing what he has to do in the future. Like, I mean, what does that have to do with being involved in the Scott Fish Bowl? I just thought his process was interesting reading about it. I think we're missing a trick if you focus on who's taking part, or if I'm taking part, or if you care about anyone else's team. Like, with dynasty players, everything's about improving your dynasty team. My mind goes straight to that.
Yep.
That's me. Or mute it, man. It's a real everyone uses the hashtag mute it. You're good. Hey Uriah, how you doing? Drew Songs and Music. Hope you guys had a good vacation. I did. I went to 4-H camp and then my Scott Fish Bowl draft. So, I didn't go to 4-H camp. It's not like they allow 40-year-old campers, but I went and volunteered at 4-H camp and I had a good time there. So thank you. And sheesh. Exactly. How dare I take time off? Can you discuss the concerns with Drake London? We've been discussing our concerns with Drake London all off season. Which ones are you talking about? Are the new concerns? He was the number one drafted wide receiver, had an elite target share last year. Number one drafted wide receiver, by the way, feels like you're narrativizing the fact he had high draft capital, but he's never been number one nothing. Let's just for our thing. Maybe he was the first drafted that year. I can't remember, but that's putting the number one in front of a player's name because you want him to be good. You know what I mean? Had an elite target share last year. I would argue our definitions there.
23%. He had the 25th highest target share in the NFL last year.
And again, it's a little narrative-y. Like Deshaun Jackson never had above a 20% target share, but he was a wide receiver one. And target share rankings aren't exactly convinced. We're trying to put high numbers next to a player's name to convince ourselves. If someone's going to bewilder us, let's not have it be us, Drew. And has 2 QB upgrades. Baby! Any reason he can't be a top 10 wide receiver? You're coming at it from a different direction. The reason I don't have him there or that in the range of potential is because I look at career development and career likely outcome based on what they've done in the NFL so far. And hitting the top 10 would be a remarkably anomalous result from what he's done in the NFL so far. Not that it can't happen. It's just most players to get there don't go through those career highlights to get there. And so I don't think it's likely. And then we go back to my college profile, which will also let bias me, at least until we get past year 3. And I didn't think he really had Stephon Diggs or Devontae Adams in his range of outcomes from his college profile. And so that's why I don't think he's a top 10 wide receiver. And again, outside of the putting high numbers next to it to convince yourself, what you're saying is Cousins or Penix, who's a complete unknown, are an upgrade for some reason. And Cousins has been really good when he's had elite wide receivers and a pretty solid system around him. And before that, he was just an interception machine. And above average QB, don't get me wrong, deserves the job. I'm rooting for Cousins. I like him. High passing air yards. He's great for fantasy. I think he's good for a team too. But he's not Aaron Rodgers. And we're saying he's an upgrade over someone else. I don't know. Hopefully he can provide the Andy Dalton medium line. Yeah, sure. And Penix, I have no idea. No one does. No one's seen him play in the NFL. And we won't know until he's played at least 17 games in the NFL what we have. Cousins to below or Cousins to higher. So again, I think most of your reasons why you're talking yourself into a top 10 range of outcomes here come from yourself. You're putting high numbers next to them when the rankings don't particularly matter, and then saying something is an upgrade and describing some form of volume you had last year, a very specific one, as elite, which is just, again, a narrativist phrase. Take all of that away, and you've got a pretty solid profile of a wide receiver who should do pretty good, who you're trying to elevate into expecting the top 10. And that's where I'd say I'm at. Like, it could happen, but I think a medium range of outcomes is much more likely. And that's where I'm at. I'm not going to push myself higher. Like, again, if someone's going to bamboozle me, I'm going to have it not be me. At least let's not have me trick myself. And there's a lower range of outcomes too, where he has been more of what he's been, which is pretty solid, but not an every week starter. Zach, that was a whole big paragraph, but I took like a week off, so I've got lots of words there. What am I missing? What am I exaggerating? What am I being a dick about? Oh.
Well, so I want to approach this from an entirely different direction. So, like, Drew, it's perfectly acceptable to be in on Drake London. In fact, a lot of people are in on Drake London. Drake London currently, by ADP, is going off the board as wide receiver 12. Now, for me, if I'm drafting a player at wide receiver 12, he darn well better be a wide receiver 1. Like,
you're paying for that breakout.
Yeah. And so to already be paying the price for a breakout that you're hoping to happen seems to me like it's bad business, where I would rather go get Michael Pittman or Devontae Smith or Tank Dell or George Pickens, who are lower drafted players, still young enough to have a similar like longevity upside as London. You're not paying as much, and you still get the chance that they roll into a top 12 receiver season, especially somebody like Devontae Smith, who's done it before. Why not go do that rather than Drake London? And it's not that I think you're hearing Peter and I say Drake London's probably a wide receiver 2, so he's probably somewhere between 12 and 20. And hearing that as negative because either you bought into the Drake London hype in 2020, was it 22 when he came out? Yeah, 2022, or you are heavily invested in London and you're doing that like hope thing. And I get it. Like, it's so easy to narrativize hope when it's a player like London who has had some things go wrong early in his career and things that look like they may go right, but you're still paying the price like they're already right. And so even if he does end up as a top 10 wide receiver, all you did was get like even money for it. If you're getting him as the wide receiver 12. Now, if you drafted him and you have him on your team and you want to hope, go ahead, but he's also the type of player that I would rather trade for, Deebo Samuels plus, T. Higgins plus, Tank Dell plus. I'd rather do that than hope that the Drake London is going to become Justin Jefferson or AJ Brown or and honestly, the same thing with Garrett Wilson, was in that same class, who's going 6 overall. Like, even though I think Garrett Wilson has a much better chance and is a much better receiver than Drake London, at wide receiver 6, there is not a lot of meat on that bone. And I think we've done this thing in Dynasty where sometimes we run out our hope to the nth degree, and then people draft on that instead of drafting on what is actually happening, what you're actually seeing. And so we kind of cling to that past evaluation. So again, Drew, if you want to go like make that bet on Drake London, go for it. But I think that, again, target share, he was 23 and change %, which made him wide receiver 25 in terms of total target share. You're going to have to hope that offense picks up an awful lot because his targets, even though he had a 23% target share, he was still around, what was he, 110, 117? I don't have it on me, but I can look that up while we do this. But he had 110 targets last year, 117 in 22. So again, not a bad player, and yes, a good situation, but still you're going to have to see a huge move in the positive for him to be a top 10. And if you're having to take him at 12, it's not quite enough for me to make that bet.
Yeah, pretty much that. I was just looking him up. Yeah, he's had a top 36 season. I think he was top 36 both years. It's not like he's not in a breakout year. He just hasn't put himself in the conversation with the most likely breakouts into the top 12 for me.
Peter, why do you hate Drake London? Is really the question that Drew is asking.
Yeah, and pretty much just that is the answer. Mouthful of God. Hello. Are wide receiver rush attempts over or underrated? I mean, are they rated? Outside of a few players like Deebo Samuel, pretty much, and the hope of Curtis Samuel once, and when he did become relevant, it wasn't through rush attempts. Maybe Percy Harvin. They're few and far between, and the idea of a hybrid player keeps cropping up every now and again, with some players looking like they have potential. Some people believed it about Rondell Moore because of his physical abilities and some of his cold stats as well. The NFL just isn't overly creative, and if it is creative, it takes a very long time and usually new and innovative GMs to introduce it. And so that's just never really been something that caught on because it's so talent specific. And coaches tend to have a way they want to run their scheme. Having like a secondary playbook for just in case I get Deebo Samuel isn't really in their head. So I would think largely overrated if they're rated at all, but you do have to respect them when they turn up. Someone like Percy Harvin, someone like Deebo Samuel. Outside of that's the whole story, if you know what I mean. There's not, and this will become a thing. That's all I've got off the top of my head. Zach?
Even like the Chase Claypool touches in his rookie year. Do you remember that where they would use him on like jet sweeps inside the 10 and he scored whatever it was, 3 or 4 or 5 touchdowns? Like, yes, they're underrated in terms of what they're bringing, but I think they are overrated in terms of the number of players that we think can actually do that, as opposed to the number of players that actually can do that. And if you pull back as an NFL team, it's far more efficient to get them the ball through the air than it is to hand the ball off to them. So why are we taking an efficient play and making it less efficient and hoping that the receiver can make up for it by being a runner, as opposed to just throwing the ball to them and let them be a receiver? So it's
to broaden it out like that. I also think about the player, like tight ends. They're paid to play at least 3 different positions, but they get a lot less than wide receiver and a lot less than running backs most of the time. So you're going to ask a wide receiver to play running back, exposing him to a whole new environment, extra risk potentially with that different skill set and the training that required to prepare you for the one for the other, do a whole bunch more work, and you're still going to get the one paycheck. You know, I think from a player's perspective, outside of someone that's particularly gifted or used to that, it's not going to become like a catchy thing. No one's going to want to do that. Unless you're failing, in which case you're probably struggling to elevate to the NFL already. Yeah. And, you know.
I mean, like, it's nice with Debo, but Debo's kind of that outlier guy.
It's like a Christian McCaffrey outlier, but even Christian McCaffrey outliers are a little more common because running backs with that kind of upside through target share happen every now and again, whereas the Debo set, like literally I've named all three that I know, and there's probably some more if we dig back in history. But you know.
Yeah, Tyreek, his first year, he had some carries.
How is Roman Wilson going to fare in Pittsburgh? I don't know. The team's got a very successful history with drafting wide receivers. It's impossible and silly to ignore it at this point. I wasn't overly impressed with his college profile. I think it was fair. And I think he's entering a mediocre situation with a lot of talent around him. So, I don't know. I don't have high expectations. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
I think he's going to be good. I think that I really do. I think Pittsburgh has improved more than people think offensively with their offensive line. And I think that missing piece of Deontay Johnson, who's now in Carolina, Roman Wilson has a really good chance to, and pardon the pun, but slot in. And so, like, I really like that. I think Russell Wilson is actually like a still better than average quarterback, and especially for fantasy. And I think that this is going to be a better offense than people expect. I think that picks up Freiermuth. I think that picks up Pickens. I think it picks up Roman Wilson. I think it picks up Najee Harris. I think this is a better team, and this is a team that you're going to want pieces of. Now, Roman Wilson is probably not going to come in and do the Jarvis Landry thing where he sees 130 targets in year 2 and you know catches 110. That's not probably going to happen. But I do think Roman Wilson is more than capable of playing the slot for Pittsburgh and being a good wide receiver.
I think Wilson, right? I think Wilson's a huge improvement from where they're at. You couldn't have almost gone down, but I think Wilson's a lot underrated after last year in general. And so I think that's a fair point. Frank in the chat, is Gus Edwards underrated? No, I think he's fairly rated. You're just never going to get excited about having Gus Edwards, but that's me. He seems to have the inside track to being the lead back. Yeah, and we know what he does with that. He if you need 5 yards, he's going to get you 3. If you need 2 yards, he's going to get you 3. But he's going to do a lot. He's a very competent grinder, if you know what I mean, and fair play to him. But for fantasy purposes, there's a ceiling there, you know.
But I think he's also been kind of unfairly underrated as a grind. Like I think he's been better than a lot of players who have played in the Ravens offense at running back that people liked, and they hate Gus Edwards because he comes in and performs admirably when people get hurt that they like. And like, look, I've ridden Gus Edwards twice to championships. Like he's not, I think he's not bad. Like, I don't think that I'm not going to take him as a top like 15 running back or anything, but like he should be fine.
I think here's what's going on. For me, most running backs have some sort of narrative win behind them in the top 36 or in the dead zone. Like, this guy's going to be great. Most of that is BS and not true, and so I don't get affected by it. And so I end up feeling like Gus Edwards appropriately, but I feel like a lot of running backs, other people like a lot more. Like, I feel like them, like I feel like about Gus Edwards. They're fine. It's just in fantasy, they're not providing you a particular. Your running back 2 spot is basically just a dead spot. I would leave it blank in a start 2 running back league unless I can get a top 12 guy in there. I don't care. I will stream that position. Whereas most people are more excited about their running back 2, and I don't think they should be. So that's what's happening with Gus Edwards for me, from the way I'm representing him. Like, I think he's fine. But I think most running backs outside of a very few are just fine. And I think more people are excited about a greater number. And that way Gus Edwards gets underrated, even though I think that's how we should feel about at least 20 running backs that people are more excited by. You know what I mean?
So to me, there's not much difference between Gus Edwards and Kenneth Walker.
Yeah,
but
right.
But everybody loves Ken Walker, and I'd rather take Gus Edwards and just get Ken Walker 10 rounds later. Like
that kind of thing. Like, I don't think he's underrated. I think he's fairly rated, and I think there's a whole bunch of running backs above him that are overrated. You know what I mean?
Yep.
2 lemons. Thank you, Toronto Dave. Good evening to all. Also, happy to be here. I'm one of the lucky ones to have my electricity back after Hurricane Beryl. Well, I'm glad to hear it, Alan. I'm sorry you went through that. Glad to see you're doing okay, though. Bob Gilchrist, check in to find this year's Traylon Burks. This year's Traylon Burks is Traylon Burks. So there's that. Return yards in your league. Toronto Dave, double lemon party hat. Nice.
Party hat.
Baker Kid 2, 12-team Superflex PPR tight end premium. Which side? Addison and Michael Wilson. All right. Or Tank Dell and Jacoby Myers. This is the same position trade that I feel kind of about. I mean, Addison to Tank Dell. I'll take Tank Dell, but just because he had a better year last year. But I think both are on fairly equal footing for me. Addison slightly above it in terms of ranked potential. But Tank Dell's got a much better floor after last year. Wilson's fine, and Jacoby Myers has been repeatedly better than fine, but the NFL, is going to NFL. They probably have a similar range of outcomes. They're both the same position. I don't see a big value switch either way. I kind of hate this trade, is the ultimate answer, and I'd probably stand pat whichever side I stood. If I'm going to make a deciding factor, I guess Addison's got a little more upside than Dell. I like Addison a lot. I think but his value's a little damn right now because everyone believes they can narrativize Minnesota, and it feels like you're paying more than his value right now for some leagues. So I don't really have a side here. I think it's sideways.
Am I crazy? I'd rather have a pick back than Michael Wilson. I'd rather have,
at least that's the trade a little bit.
Yeah, if that's Addison in a second, I'd rather have that.
Yeah. Yes.
But I mean, Peter, to your point, like I prefer Addison to Dell, but not by much. And Dell's already done it, and so that's just again, I'm doing exactly what I told Drew Sorensen not to do. Is I'm holding on to that evaluation because I had Addison, like Dell was here and Addison was here. And I still think that probably plays out. But again, that's all narrative and based on my anchor bias. So but at least I accept it. I understand it. And the same thing with Drew. Like if you understand you're doing it and are willing to
know the bet you make,
then that's fine. Like play the game how you play. But
I think Mike Wilson may be a little, sleepery. Like, I don't think he's done bad so far, but Jacoby Myers has been good before. So that balances out too. And they're all wide receivers. Like, someone loses this trade.
Myers is in a weird situation where they just spent a top 10 pick to get a tight end who should eat, because Myers was the wide receiver 2 in targets in Las Vegas. If Bowers doesn't eat greatly into that, I will be surprised. Just based on what they spent to go get it.
See, I think Myers will stick around filling those roles for this team and the next team, and that balances out to me because Wilson didn't impress in his rookie season, but he didn't disappoint either, and so that's value-wise. I'm like, I guess I don't know. It's just too even for me, frankly, and I think someone loses it instead of both of you potentially winning in some different way. So I don't like the trade. It's that simple. How have your Scott Fishroll drafts gone? Any noticeable trends you've seen? Well, I missed my first 3 picks, but the ADP took care of me pretty well until John Bosch decided to kick me in the 3rd just to punish me. But I think it's gone all right. ADP's been relatively stable, as you'd imagine. With a sharp group, the deeper you get, the more often people are taking reaches, but not really. After you get to round 10 and beyond, going 5 rounds down to grab a player isn't really a reach because that boundary of it, a reasonable expectation of when you should take a player gets larger the larger you get. And by the time you get to round 10, it's basically take who you want, in my opinion. And you basically see that reflected out. Like most of the We're on pick 174 right now. And all 150, the top 150 players in ADP have been taken. All but about 20 players in the top 170 have been taken. And the shots that have been taken deeper down are only a couple of rounds out. So no one's even reaching that far. So I think ADP has been pretty stable, at least to my experience in my draft, which is about what I find and expect from ADP. It gets wilder the deeper you get. It's pretty good, but it's not like, because he's projected 3 picks away, I know he's coming back to me on the turn. If you want that guy, you better reach 3 picks, even if it's in the top 2 rounds, because there's been a little of that, taking the 4th player instead of the 1st player. There's always that range of outcomes in the top rounds as well. And Zach, you haven't had yours yet. You done any mocks? You compiled any more stats?
I've done 0 mocks. I have been fairly active in the 107 chat, but I have made no bad picks yet in the Scott Fish Bowl, because
Can guarantee that.
Yeah, my draft doesn't happen until the 21st of July, so I still have another 10 days before I'm Scott Fish Bowling. But it's been interesting to see the movement of ADP on players like Shaheed. So like the kick returners, but like when you see Matt Harmon all of a sudden come out and be like, "Oh, I just looked at Scott Fishbowl scoring, and I'm curious about the Saints offense, and I think that Shaheed could be a scorer." And if you look at last year's scoring, he was I think he was a top 20, maybe a top 30, but he was up there in terms of overall scoring, things like that. The little like guys who were sleeper-y are not, and people are. It's been fun for me this year. I think people are far more plugged in this year than I've ever seen them to the actual Scott Fishbowl scoring, and not just people who aren't doing analysis work, but like the analysts this year are. I've seen so many more. Hey, these are my Scott Fishbowl rankings, or this is what I think that the scoring settings do to the draft board, and these are my sleepers. I've seen so many more articles breaking down Scott Fishbowl scoring this year than I ever have, and it's awesome, because that's part of the reason why Scott changes it. It's to keep it interesting, but also to get us talking about things and to be thinking about additions for our leagues. So the points per first down, or the tight end premium, or even the fact that you can flex 6 different players in this. So it's like you play super flex. This is like a lowercase super flex league where like every position is a flex after that first guy. So it's I am really excited. I haven't seen kickers go as early, other than Peter. I haven't seen kickers go as early as I kind of anticipated, especially with the sleeper drafts where you have to start a kicker. I kind of expected to see some of those guys go off the board a little earlier, because some of them are scoring what a QB2 are going to put up. They're not going to have the spike weeks, but they're putting up a really solid floor. So,
yeah, the top 12 are kind of flex worthy, but I still think kicker suffers from the variance in that you're not as likely to get a top 3 kicker by selecting a top 3 kicker as a top 3 running back or a top 3 wide receiver and stuff like that. But they're flexible for sure. Kickers inside the top 12, for example, are below top 24 and top 24 running backs and wide receivers, but top 5 kickers are above both. But it's about how likely you are to snatch a top 5 kicker. Every time I think I've locked one in, like Justin Tucker, that's the year he happens to be 6th, But, don't tell him the Lions. Rayman, non-PPR, traded ETN for Garrett Wilson. See, a destabilized trade. You can both benefit from that in different directions. I prefer Wilson pretty strongly. I don't think that reflects the the decrease in ETN's value recently. But I do think it's a decent trade for the other team if they have to go all in for running backs. I can't figure out if you got ETN or I thought you got Wilson here, but then you said you have Hall too. Feels like too many Jets. No, yeah, that's right. You got Wilson for ETN. I would take Wilson for ETN, just positional advantage and expected career arc. I think you got great value out of ETN based on where he is in most trades in the market right now. He's normally somewhat of a target for me this year because people don't seem to really like him as much as they should, despite his ranks. So yeah, definitely the Wilson side, but your league seems to be an exception for ETN. An exception, one of many, I'm sure.
Feels like too many Jets, but you have the good Jets.
I'm not worried about that.
You have the good Jets. I mean, you have a top 3 running back and a top 15 wide receiver. Like, I'll take that.
Solid. Okay, that's the end of the comments. I guess we can go to bed now because I really like sleep.
I mean, it's early even for me. I don't know. So I am. It's strange because I'm in the Will Hunting division, and you were in a live draft for Scott Fishbowl.
I was.
And I think that the live drafts tend to be a little heavy on the analysts. The Will Hunting division is, I don't know why any of us chose this division because it is just an absolute knife fight. Well, I mean, it's Mike Fiella and Andrew Cooper, who's Coupe Fiasco, the tight end guru. It's Jeff Greenwood, who has written for the fantasy footballers. I think he's currently kind of like taking a break, being a family man, that sort of thing. But like he has been an analyst. Paul Charchian, who is like OG. It's John Lepresto, who is Fantasy Six Pack. It's Dave Wright, the FF Spaceman. It's me, whatever. It's Dan Wiesner, who finished in the top 20 last year from the Undroppables. It's Jamie Calandro and Bob Gilchrist. Like it's like literally 10 analysts in the division, which is I think for me kind of dumb. I shouldn't have done that. I mispicked when I picked the division, but it's always a lot of fun. But I think the edges are you have to do different things to gain edges in that league, where I think my advantage is I'm not worried about looking foolish. I'm already a dummy. Like, I fully admit that. That's the moniker. So that is, I think, going to be my hammer, is that I can do play a tight end as my quarterback too. I can fade quarterback as far as I possibly can. I can do that sort of thing. And I think to be successful in the Scott Fish Bowl, you have to differentiate, but you also have to find those little advantages that other people look at and go, well, you can't do that because you can't do that in fantasy football. Scott's trying to get us out of that mindset.
Yeah, I think this many years of Scott Fishbowl have taught people a little bit about quarterbacks. I actually start to think we've almost overvalued it in the early rounds, and that the majority of the teams in my league went quarterback at least once, probably twice. And that's great. That's always been my strategy. But now everyone's doing it. The advantage is kind of bled. The only reason I was going to do it is because I think there were 2 undervalued guys at the term, and I missed my pick, so I didn't get to do it. But one of them had already gone by the time it got to my pick, so I might not have gone that way. Scott Fishbowl Scoring has always tried to emphasize running back, and it has always failed because the position is such a freaking nightmare, especially in terms of predictability and injury. This year, and with these drafting trends, it may have achieved it somewhat, because running backs are getting slightly too far devalued. Wide receiver isn't that much different in this scoring format from PPR. Running backs are up quite a bit, not like drastically, but they are up significantly. And quarterbacks are improved a little bit as well, which brings running back up, leaving wide receiver about where it is, and bumping quarterback just a touch, especially if they run. And I think the running quarterbacks are getting slightly undervalued. No, they can't be, because quarterback is so overvalued. It's actually led to some of the passing quarterbacks getting undervalued, because if they throw 40 passing touchdowns, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, running backs might be finally, after this many years of Scott Fishbowl, something of a value in the early rounds. Anyway, that's one of the things I didn't notice straight away, but the more I dig into it after my draft, the more I start thinking that way. I do think in terms of, there's theory and then there's play. I still think locking in quarterbacks when you find the ones that you want, and even if reaching, I still think that's solid in the Scott Fishbowl, because you've got such sharks and there are such landmines in terms of predicting the future. A quarterback is much more of a solid pick with a lower floor from your expectation in general, whereas running backs can be dirt or they can be exactly what you want. Quarterbacks are not as good or decent, or exactly what you want. So I still think quarterback, emphasizing it. I mean, literally, like you say, the sharks, the guys in the live drafts are doing that, and that's not just because they're not thinking about it well enough. It's because in a practical sense, in a play sense, you're actually playing it. You don't get to just throw your spreadsheet at them and try to win. You actually have to engage in this league. Quarterback's a much more solid pick early. So I do like, especially like your strategy of going for the first one, then letting the second one maybe fade a little bit.
Well, and I think
the middle way. I think
you can do that in the Scott Fishbowl, especially you just mentioned the quarterback that throws touchdowns. Somebody like Baker Mayfield is going to fall. Baker Mayfield is actually a decent QB2 in Scott Fishbowl scoring, even though you look at him and you're like, I don't want that. But Daniel Jones may be a good QB2. I mean, he may be nothing because he's coming off a knee injury and he may not run but like there are plays like that could end up being interesting. But I think that you have to this year. I think value-based drafting, it may be like this may be the ideal format for just take the best player, because it doesn't matter what position they are, because everything's a flex. So
that has a more influence on best drafting trends than you might think. It essentially elevates the starter requirements to be a starter in your league, but also provides so much variability to how you can draft and still have 12 or 11 rather, of the best players on a week-to-week basis. Logan, that's one of two. We also have some smaller ones, and I've taken the stacking books up, using them as that's mostly my nightstand. I don't read so much anymore. I thought I was a prolific reader until I met my wife, and when you combine those two, that's kind of how this happens. I was just telling Zach before the show, actually, I haven't been reading a lot for the last year or two. Just hasn't really fit into my life. Well, I did discover Kindle, and while I do prefer a book, that fits much better into my life. And this last week, where I took some time off and I was at Fort H Camp, I actually managed to start reading again. Don't get me wrong, in college, I read a lot of the stuff you should read. That's what a lot of what's on that shelf, followed by my wife, who's always been smarter than me and just read stuff she enjoyed and thought was good. So there's a lot of Nora Jones over there too. And a lot of books on you should read before you die, which I kind of kicked that list when I was in college. Now I'm much easier on myself. And don't get me wrong, there are some books on that list I genuinely enjoyed reading and will reread, like Franz Kafka. It always engages me, Arthur Kessler. For sure. I genuinely enjoy reading Oscar Wilde. There's a lot of books you should read that I actually think are enjoyable to read, but I've delved more into in that side of my reading. So I didn't read Agatha Christie for years because that's terrible literature, and Stephen King too. And since maturing a little bit, I'm like, they're meant to be good, and you just have to start reading them, and you realize they're engaging, they're fun. And the more I read Agatha Christie, the more I realized she was an underrated writer. Not the books, and they're enjoyable and good mysteries. As a writer, she can it's a talent. The only one I can think of is Hemingway describing something very vividly, but you can't tell what the description is. They just throw a word out here or there, and suddenly you have this very vivid image of a scene. And Agatha Christie is the only other one I can think of that does that anywhere near that level. Few words, and yet it's so descriptive. And so I read basically all Agatha Christie. But especially this last week and the last few times I've been able to read with my schedule, it's I've been delving into stuff like Neil Gaiman, and well, this last week I knocked off another couple of you might not know him. He's a British author, but I think he's pretty popular. His name's just jumped out my head. Hang on. That's annoying as hell. Terry Pratchett, yeah. And so I've been reading a lot of Terry Pratchett. This last week I dusted off Equal Rights and Sorcerer. I'm not into fantasy stuff, but I'm more into sci-fi, but I will read it. And he's fantastic at it. And funny, and also a great writer, even though he's not books that you need to read kind of a list. I definitely think he should be on that. Douglas Adams was my gateway into realizing that as well. But yeah, sorry, that was a large answer, which from what was probably a throwaway question, but they're a large feature of my life, so I got words on them, you know.
I think it's really pretentious sometimes, the writing community and the books you need to read.
Oh, I was peak pretension when I started to read. I wanted to be smart. Yeah. Like I went to college, I was like, I should be someone that reads books because I hated reading. Well, and it did not help reading those books, by the way. Like Crime and Punishment did not make me love reading just because I could say I read it. And it was only after I found Douglas Adams and actually good writers that write stuff that's fun for me personally, because it's all perspective taste, to read. I was like, oh, I actually love reading. And that's when my reading level just escalated to bookshelf. But yeah, carry on, Zach. You're right. There's an awful lot of pretension around reading, but it's like TV shows. Whatever you enjoy is whatever you enjoy.
Yeah, and that's it. It's to me, there are a lot of really good writers who write popular things or not like not literary, like the capital literary things. So I want to go back to Frank's question because he jumped since it's quiet, I have a real philosophical question, which anytime you start off like that, I am in. I think you said when it came to London, we have to ditch the initial views of him based on draft position. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So what I think, what I'm trying to say, Frank, is not that you necessarily have to ditch your initial views, but your initial views don't matter as much as what's going on now. And his draft position is what allows him to be the wide receiver one on his team, is what allows him to be on the field to garner whatever targets he can drive toward him. So he's already doing that. So I think if you count that again, like, what are we doing? You know, you can't count that got him to where we are and then say he's going to do that more because he was the first pick. Like, it doesn't work that way. He's already, like, being the first pick and being a first round pick for his team got him the opportunity to be on the field, got him the opportunity to earn the 23% target share that he earned last year, the 117 targets. It got him on the field as a rookie and earned 110 targets as a rookie. So, like, it's not to me that you have to give up your initial views, but you have to change. Well, it's kind of the Bayesian thing. Like, when new information presents itself, you have to take that into account. And the newer information is probably closer to where we're at now. Like, I am not not nearly the same person I was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Like, so the information we get now is probably better information than, oh, he was a first round pick. I mean, like, if we're doing that, you should go draft N'Keal Harry, in like the second round of your startups, because he was a first round pick. Like, is that what we're like? You have to base it on new information, and it's not like, again, it's not that Drake London is bad. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're still attaching the fact that you had him as the 101 in the rookie draft in 2022, and that's coloring your assessment, I think you're doing it wrong. I had Treylon Burks as the wide receiver 1 in the 2022 class. If I still think Treylon Burks is going to be a wide receiver 1 in Tennessee, then I'm doing something wrong, because the new information that we've been presented says he's not. The new information we've been presented with Drake London says he's probably a pretty solid wide receiver 2. Like, wide receiver 2 with some upside, but if you're drafting him at wide receiver 12, you really whittle off that upside. And then why don't we think that way with quarterbacks? Our opinions of Levis and Bryce seem to be unchanged. I think the difference between the quarterback position and the receiving position, and where guys mature and grow to, is different. But also, we are doing that with those two, where we're holding on to the prior, and that's not a great look. But also, the payoff is greater with a quarterback. If Bryce Young becomes a top 10 quarterback, that's a bigger payoff than if Drake London becomes a top 10 wide receiver. It just is, especially super flex leagues. And so I think Will Levis, I think people are out over their skis on Will Levis. Like, Will Levis is fine, but I don't think he is a difference-making quarterback. And if you can turn around and sell him to somebody who does think that, I'm on board. So, and then he kept on going, even to Peter's point, where we put guys like Edwards in the same box every year. Why do we change our views for some positions and not for others? Because the positions are different. Running backs come in quick, and the shelf life on them is not necessarily long. There are exceptions to that. I mean, you've got Frank Gore, you've got Christian McCaffrey, who's been here a long time. You've got Kamara, who's been, again, since 2017. Like, you have a few, but running back is such a different position and so recyclable. Quarterback is not recyclable until the end of a rookie contract. So, like, you're getting 2, 3, 4, 5 years of a rookie quarterback, as opposed to a running back who comes in and may be gone. May Sony Michel it real quick. Like, so they're different positions. So we necessarily have to treat them differently. And they're also they're different values in our game, depending on your position requirements, depending on scoring settings. Like, there are leagues where running backs are incredibly valuable, and Gus Edwards should be held on to. But to me, it's a matter of parsing, and it's not something that we tend to do, Frank, on these shows, because we don't get down granular like that. But it's an interesting question, because if you pull it back and get philosophical, you end up with archetypes. And I dig that, because that's how I kind of think about players. And so to me, it's what archetype is this player, and what's the arc of this archetype typically, as to whether or not I'm willing to kind of make that bet or get out. But
yeah, I'm obviously going to approach it from a slightly different direction, but it does lead to 2 or 3 of the conclusions I think that I can actually add to the conversation. I don't know if it's people don't believe I can apply it holistically, or they just don't believe it. But I keep having to say the same ones, which is great for me, because they keep being an advantage, I think. One thing is the only reason to have positions is because we respect that they are very different in reality, if you know what I mean. Like, there should just be one position fantasy player. The reason we have positions is because we identify that the positions actually have significant indicators for us to understand that players develop at different rates, on average, or majoritively for that matter. at different speeds. So to answer your last point, is because we shouldn't. Quarterbacks elevate into their highest range of outcomes at a different rate or a different number of career years, like Zach said. Running backs, if they don't do it year one, you're already looking rough. Wide receivers, the last 6 weeks of year one is really the key, but you can finish inside the top 36. That's still pretty solid. Tight ends, you can do nothing for 4 years and then be Delaney Walker. It doesn't really matter if you were drafted as a running back. That's the hardest and weirdest position because it's the smallest sample. But they have different expectations based on those identifiers, not because they're a tight end. The reason we staple tight end to them as a designation is because playing that particular role has certain identifying features we can follow. And so we shouldn't just apply the same adjustment to everyone. And also to your last point here, the fact that Gus Edwards is stuck in the same box. And again, my point was that all the running backs are elevated above him should be put in that box or below. There are way too many narratives of people trying to adjust expectations and wishing on too many when really so few have significantly higher expectations. It's Joe Mixon. He's been a top 12 running back multiple times, and now the wind's gone out of the sails because even at the time when he was hyped as a top 12 running back, I was like, yes, but you got to remember that all top 12 running backs have the elite upside you're chasing. You're just stapling that top 12 number to him to make yourself excited. Like, you really need a top 5 running back to get that Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara value, and he doesn't really have that necessarily in his range of outcomes unless he outkicks some coverage. The other thing is, and I can't emphasize this enough, I apply it to everything I do, and it's very holistic, and you can just have it, and you just put it into your process and whatever you're trying to decide. If you're trying to say that a situation elevates a player, you're already over your skis. It's not that it doesn't happen or it can't happen, or having a better quarterback or a worse quarterback isn't a difference. But what you're essentially saying at some level in your subconscious, the player isn't good enough. Players who elevate positions are the ones you typically find in that very tippy top that we're really chasing. Now, that's not always true. CeeDee Lamb developed into a difference-making role, but he did so kicking certain identifiers, which were textbook year 3 top 12 breakouts, and that's what he did. But in good situations and bad situations, you'll see a player doing much better than we would have expected very early in their career. It's the A.J. Brown corollary. A.J. Brown comes into Tennessee, a remarkably similar team to what Corey Davis did 2 years before. And A.J. Brown is phenomenally impressive. He beats Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase's numbers from that year or whatever, but he was phenomenally impressive that year. Whereas Corey Davis came in a couple of years in basically the same team formation and was borderline, maybe that's interesting, and so we'll use situation to say maybe his year 2 could be better. I did that because I wanted Corey Davis to be good because I stapled my rookie evaluation and I try and hold on to it for other reasons. But the minute I'm trying to say, well, maybe those reasons and maybe the situation elevates, the minute I'm doing that, I'm already recognizing that he wasn't enough to elevate the situation year 1, like A.J. Brown was a couple years later. And so that's when we come to Drake London, that's where I'm at. Top 36 year 1, that's good. Top 36 year 2, it's not terrible. CeeDee Lamb, again, developed, but he didn't really hit the marks, and he definitely didn't elevate the situation, even with the benefit of draft capital. Remember that having draft capital creates earlier expectations. It's not 2-3 years out, which we're out in Drake London. He's got a first-round pick. Why aren't you respecting it? Because with first-round opportunity, he has not overly impressed me yet. If you just reverse your argument and stop trying to prove yourself right, then what you'll see is that draft capital is actually a hindrance to his outcome at this point, and you're trying to use a situation to justify that he can be elevated. So in both directions, you're saying, one, we should have higher expectation because he should have had more opportunity than most players 2 years ago, which is a little backwards. And now you're saying he's not good enough. The situation can elevate him. Why won't you like him? Because I don't really want a player to need Patrick Mahomes, a perfect offensive line, and like a coordinator who's just out of his mind in love with a guy who says, just pass to Drake London for him to get to the top 12. That's not my ideal player to target as a top 12 wide receiver pick. Now, all of that sounds negative because it is, but you got to realize I'm talking within a range of outcomes. Top 36 in year 1 is good. Top 36 in year 2 isn't great, but it's not terrible. He's clearly performing. His target share, as someone pointed out last year, is fine. And the situation was bad. Most players aren't Jefferson, Chase, Devontae Adams, who is that weird career breakout arc, or Tyreek Hill. Again, less draft capital, less expectation early, which is one way you can find those guys by understanding that there's a decreasing expectation for first-round picks and an increasing expectation for lower-round guys. It's working in the opposite direction to the way you're trying to apply it to Drake London. Pardon me. So, just recognizing those trends, you'll realize that Drake London's good. I'm expecting more than what he has ever done before this year. And I think you'll be pretty good with him on your team. I think he's a good player. I think he's an NFL level player, should have that range of outcomes. But what you should expect is slightly less than a difference-making wide receiver because, again, what most players who do that do is more impressive than what Drake London has done. It's still his range of outcomes, but we're also recognizing the flaw because even within the arguments we're using to value him or say, why aren't people changing? They're decreasing. And to your point about quarterbacks, like, I don't know, man, go talk to a guy who has those two quarterbacks on the roster. They will feel like they have a lesser trade asset a year later because ADP and especially my expectations do drop after a disappointing year one. But again, to my first point and Zach's last point, or second to last point, my expectations for quarterback are a little slower than for running back. Definitely. And wide receiver, a little bit. You can have a rough year one as a quarterback, and I'll still be like, okay, well, it's not dead yet. Whereas wide receivers, if you have a worse year than Drake London, we're not talking Drake London here. He had a pretty solid year one. If Corey Davis or even Treylon Burks, to go back to our other two misses, that in year one is devastating. Whereas that level of production in year one for a quarterback, I'll still, I'll drop him, but my expectations are still slightly better because quarterbacks can be slower to develop into the league. There's a little noise in that as well because while the sample isn't as small as tight end, it's the smallest outside of tight end. Running back and wide receiver, I've got a lot more examples of players elevating into those career paths, where if you only got one quarterback on a team and there are only so many of those great quarterbacks every year, we enter the career arc has a little bit of questions. Patrick Mahomes played one game in year one. How can you possibly use that to say that Young has a low expectation year one is what I'm saying. I mean, it's true, but also let's keep our hats on here. It's not for sure a quarterback, but there is a slower expectation in general. So yeah, interesting question, but it goes kind of the core to a lot of ways I think about player development and a few of the things that I think are kind of evergreen and always have been. Again, draft capital expectations year one is great. And I baked that into my post-draft evaluation. I had to come up on London very significantly after his draft. But that means you have a higher expectation earlier, not a higher expectation later after not having hit it yet. Your expectation decreases relative to how highly you were taken. He had all that opportunity and all that value with his draft capital for 2 years, and he hasn't yet done it. That's not a death nail, but that's working in the opposite direction of how you're stating it. Whereas like a guy drafted in the 5th round that year who hasn't done too much, my expectation is now increased. Not that I expect him to finish in the top 12, but I'm expecting him to hit his peak around now in the 3rd year. We're really going to see if it's going to happen or not. Whereas Drake London, we've already started to decrease our expectations because he had that high draft capital. Or that's where I'm at anyway. Again, there are always exceptions and expectations, and I'm not talking about on average because I hate the average. This is the common, in the sample, not what happens most of the time, not what happens on average, because the average is kind of always going to be a lie with that kind of thing. But yeah, interesting question, and you can disagree with all of that, but though I will always bring up these points when doing most answers to most questions, because that's what I find to be most common. Not for sure. But most common. Bob was next, I think. I'm counting all of you. I'm counting on all of you to make mistakes.
I will make mistakes, Bob. Yeah.
Frank and chat. If I'm wrong about our changing views, how do we decide when to give up? That's a really interesting question and a really important one to answer. Again, I have answers for me, but I'm not going to say they're 100%. But like my target share series, the last 2 years have been focusing on when's too early to give up and when is too late to have already given up. And again, it's different by position. It's a little less certain at quarterback. It's very uncertain at tight end. But wide receiver, I think by week 6, I'm starting to ask questions if it's different than what I expected. And by the end of the season, for sure. Like JSN is riding the line for me of an okay rookie season. He did come on towards the end, which is what I would expect, but his total season numbers still have me a little bit questionable. Again, we can bring narratives and situation into that very reasonably for a rookie especially, and expect more next year. But he's riding the line for me. He didn't elevate the situation enough for me, and all that shit I just said. So yeah, it's a really important question. I have definite answers to, but I can't tell you there are definite answers to it. But I do think we should draw lines for ourselves. Year one running back, very, very firm line. And you can do that early in the season as well, because running back volume should be readily expected. Wide receivers is a little slower, but it's still within year one. I think you should have a deadline for yourself. Well, you don't panic sell, but you're definitely more on the, I want to get out of this than stay in it by the end of the first season at some point. Tight end, man, I draft a tight end. I stick in my taxi squad. I hope someone wakes me up in 3 years to remind me they're still there. And if they don't, then he'll be my next cut. Because I'll be like, oh, when did I get this guy? But, you know, it's just when I desperately need a roster spot. I basically have very little expectation because it's such a weird position. And tight end somewhere in the middle. Again, I have definite numbers, but I don't want you to use my numbers. I want you to come up with your own, but I do think it's important that you draw those lines. Zach, do you have lines or just a general vague around here?
I mean, it's more vague, but again, you mentioned quarterbacks, you mentioned tight ends. Those are the two where it generally takes longer to develop and the payoff is bigger for those players. So like, yeah, so like I would rather hold on to those players. I think wide receiver tends to be roster cloggers. You know, the guys you hang on to, and people will point to, oh, well, what about Devontae Adams? And oh, what about Nico Collins? And like, yes, those two. But what about the 900 other wide receivers that happened in between those two that people liked that just disintegrated? And so it's back to your point about making the play that most often happens. Like, yeah, we'll do that. And look, there are going to be some guys that I hold the flame for too long. Rondell Moore was that type of player, but to me, he still is a player that is really dependent on a coach being innovative enough to use him because he doesn't look like the typical NFL wide receiver. So it was on me for kind of expecting someone to do that. But it's quicker than you think, like making those moves.
I think that's a general rule. Be quicker than you think is comfortable because the edge now in Dynasty is being quicker, not slower.
Yeah. So
the minute I started consuming content, I heard someone say, we give up too quickly. And that was like 14 years ago. So apparently we still give up too quickly. I think it's because we don't want to be that guy that had him, lost him, and then he breaks out. But you got to let go at some fear at some point because you got to play and you got to make reasonable bets. And if you want to know what happens most often and play that way, you got to expect that taking too long or taking longer is not actually the best play. To the point on Nico Collins and Devontae Adams, I have called a little bit on that, but that's in terms of if they break out, we can have a more reasonable high expectation for them. And until the sample size got a little larger, it looked like most later unusual breakouts also had disappointing further careers. Like Adams is the exception, but the majority are Hunter Renfrow. In fact, with a slightly larger sample 5 years on, expectations should be top 24 minimum. Like they should continue to be relevant to some degree. Hunter Renfrow is the exception on the opposite end. Devontae Adams the exception on the max end, and most are going to fall somewhere in that middle. So I've caught a little on the expectations of the unusual breakouts, but the unusual breakout thing still works. Like to Zach's point, I think they've been top, depending on how you want to define it and define it as broadly as possible to actually have an answer to this. There's like 36 wide receivers since 2000 who have been somewhat of an unusual breakout in year 3, like Drake London would be, like Nico Collins was, or I think that was year 2, like Devontae Adams was in year 4. And there's been like 700 breakouts in that time. Not quite 900, but still, the majority is the majority, not just the average. So yeah, we should know that happens. But if you're drafting someone in the top 24, in the top 12, thinking they're going to be one of that minority group, just know the bet you're making. It's the less common, higher risk, and you're paying for the reward kind of a bet. Again, I was out on Brandon Ayuk year too, and he had a much more impressive rookie year that year than Drake London's had in either of his seasons. Again, because it was just a little bit of an unusual expectation. When I broke down that particular situation, I found most of it to be narrative and Samuel to actually be the team funneling target through what he did rather than what Ayuk did, and Kittle for that matter, Kittle and Samuel, and that worked out. But that might just be confirmation bias. Just missed out on Pop Douglas in a 14-team best ball. I think he's a worthy ad, but I'm not crying. But again, his expectations should increase because he had lower draft capital. If you want to apply something I just said. Are you in, out, or in the middle on Douglas, by the way? I don't think we've spoken about him.
He's fine. I think that by the time he gets to be what he could be, the Patriots are going to be moved on to. So he's not somebody that I'm particularly excited about. He is a player that I have on a lot of rosters because I added him, in the 5th round of rookie drafts, or I added him in that initial waiver run when he came out. So like I have him on a bunch of teams, and I'm not unhappy that I have him, but I don't think he's ever going to be a great player. And he's somebody that I will throw in with a trade where people are like, oh, I'm getting Pop Douglas, who is, potentially a good wide receiver in New England. He's probably going to be fine, but I don't think he ever does anything that's going to be fantasy relevant enough to warrant like actually trying to acquire him. Best ball is a little bit different because he could have a game or two, or like he should see targets. So
maybe in best ball, right? Yeah.
Well, but I mean, like it's the. He's going to be on the field.
It's in the range of outcomes, and a reasonable range of outcomes. And yeah, sure. He did some okay things year one. Again, expectations. I'm more interested in him after his year one. I think that's reasonable. Scribbles, how do you all feel about Hunter Henry? that gesture, like, okay. As a deep sleeper, I don't like sleepers. Great in red zone, improved QB play, and targets up for grabs. Targets aren't up for grabs. I don't think like that. Great in the red zone. I think it's a small sample thing, but I get what you're saying. Tight ends in general are all about touchdowns outside of the elite few. And improved QB play, you already know what I do with that. Like, if you can't do it without it, I don't care for what you're going to do with it. Although, yeah, sure, kind of, maybe. I think Hunter Henry has been relatively decent in the past. He's one of those QBs that's outside the range, but also we should have expectations of him being more than streamable, because of his history. But no, I don't think he's going to hit the relevant tier of quarterback ever, in terms of having fantasy value. But sure, you grab him in a dynasty or a best ball, or even the Scott Fish Bowl, because you need an extra tight end. There's elevated scoring there, and you hope he is the least usable in games. That's kind of where I'm at.
It'll be interesting. I heard Andrew Cooper talk about Alex Van Pelt, who's the new offensive coordinator in New England, and there were a ton of bubble screens, like design tight end screens for Njoku last year.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that translates. I don't necessarily think that's. He wasn't actually calling the plays. Stefanski was calling the plays, but Van Pelt was designing the plays last year. I think that this year in New England, Van Pelt is calling the plays. So we'll see how that. And they also just signed Austin Hooper to a 1-year deal too, who played with Cleveland, has familiarity with Van Pelt's system. But again, you're hoping that he scores 6-7 touchdowns and that you're playing him in the games that he scored 6 or 7 touchdowns. I think in Scott Fish Bowl, like
that's a great,
like throw a deep, because if he gets, I can't remember exactly what the I'll look it up, but there was somebody threw like it's not quite a meme, but like a sheet, like a picture out of it's 7 receptions for 60 yards and 5 first downs is 24 points for a tight end in Scott Fishbowl.
Mm-hmm.
So like that's not an insurmountable like stat line in a given week for Hunter Henry, but I don't think you're expecting him to do that like consistently, and I don't think you're expecting the Patriots to be great consistently.
Yeah, tight end flex players might be a little underrated on a week-to-week basis, especially in Scott Fishbowl. Do I trade Worthy for ETN? I don't want to, but yeah, ETN is a better option right now.
Especially, yeah. I mean, if your team is competitive, Genji, yes. If your team is non-competitive, but you're in a league where like trading happens a lot, like you're in an active league,
that's what
I still think I would do that because I think you'd be able to get more for ETN than you will for Worthy. Yeah, people are
going to say.
People are really scared of Worthy because he ran too fast, and so he's going to actually have to do it for a season before he's going to have the value that he probably should have. And so I think it's ETN, unless you're in a league where you're non-competitive and they don't trade, and then just hang on to Worthy. But it's like most scenarios, yes, trade him, get ETN, either
Not a
use
fancy
ETN or yeah.
That's what I was gonna say. Like I don't want to, but I think even if you're not on a competitive team, ETN probably trades for more in season, so ETN wins in any case. And not a fantasy question, but I was genuinely interested. I'm doing a master's in literature. None of my cohort finds fantasy or even sports interesting. That's fair. That happens. Glad you're all reading what you like. Yeah, and I wouldn't say I found my literary friend, my literary inclined friends, any more or less likely to be interested in sports. I know that's a meme, but like, I never experienced like that. Some of the smartest people I knew who were most into books, just to describe it that way, like they were the active score watchers every week, to be honest. But that's me.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes, especially, I went to school for creative writing, and I think that like that sometimes gets stuffy. It does.
Yeah,
it's not always, but like sometimes it does. Like I was often a little bit ostracized, just that little bit of the outsider. When I would go to poetry readings, I would be the jock who was in the back of the room, because if I went and sat in the front of the room, everybody would be looking at me like, what the hell are you doing here? That sort of thing. And so it can be, it shouldn't be. Like I think that accessing literature and being able to process and share it and talk about it and communicate with it is a great thing. And I think
so don't confuse the average for the individual thing if we're gonna fantasy relate. Like when I went to sixth form, which is what you do if you don't go to college before you go to university in England, like there were two guys like in contention. And from our small sixth form, this was a big deal, but they could get accepted to the equivalent of your Ivy League. It was Oxford and Cambridge were actually interested in them a little bit, depending on what they did. And one of them was a nerd, more nerdy like myself, and the other one was a rocked up, went to the gym every day, full on man's man type guy. Like, I mean, again, it's going to vary on an individual. And one of the most masculine men I've ever met is one of the few people from our small sixth form that, like, Oxford actually ended up offering him a place. So it depends on the individual, but yeah, on average, I get how that could mostly be your experience. And then you got Zach, who's actually an engineer, whereas I'm not. And you wouldn't necessarily expect it for you using the stereotypes. That guy's got books in his background. He's surely the smart one. Scribbles, overloaded at wide receiver on a 12-team Superflex. Now's a good year to change that. I think there's a bubble. Want to liquidate to running back, tight end, or pick. Tight end, preferably, but picks are good too. Everyone seems to be worried about target competition in Chicago. There's a lot in that sentence. Want to give me 25 seconds for Moore. DJ Moore? Oh, yeah, it must be. Yeah. That's what you're saying. Got to hold right. I think Moore's worth more than a second, but he's also not the guy I expect to get a haul for. He's less exciting right now. If you're overloaded at wide receiver, hopefully you have a much more enticing prospect. Again, when thinking about trades, the place I start is looking at the other teams. But when looking at my roster, I look at what would someone be excited to get. DJ Moore isn't on that list right now, even though I think I'm very happy to have DJ Moore, but I don't think he's hyped. I don't think he's valued. I don't think anyone's busting to get DJ Moore unless he's an average grinder like me who's like, oh yeah, DJ Moore should be worth a lot more than that. And then you'll find a pretty good trade. Instead, you're going to have to go looking for someone in your roster that is well valued, but also exciting for someone else to get. That's kind of where I start to build a trade for. And you're not going to get what you need for DJ Moore right now, is what I'm saying. He's DJ Moore. Everyone kind of likes him. He's all right. Seconds are a ridiculous offer. Don't go close to those offers. I recommend George Saunders, American guy, but won the Man Booker recently. Highly entertaining stuff. Mostly short fiction, but one fantastic novel. American author who mostly does short fiction that I would recommend is I'm trying to remember. I suck at names. This is partly why I sucked at being a nerd. It's rough being a historian and you struggle with names and dates, but you can remember the story, by the way. She wrote Girl Trouble. Look up that book. She's actually a Western Kentucky author, and Girl Trouble is a whole bunch of short stories. And honestly, I would still say one of the most remarkable writers I've come across that's alive, that I discovered while she was alive and I'm alive. You know what I mean? Not one of the old people that everyone knows is great. She hasn't done much else outside of that. I know she published a book, but I haven't read it. Why can't I remember her name? But it's a fantastic collection of short stories. Like, it really rocked my world. Like, people are able to write like this today. I thought this was like something that only happened 200 years ago. This is magnificent. She's also one of the people who shocked at hopefully, one of the last pretensions I had out of my had still in me about literature. I thought someone that went to study writing. You get to be a good writer by living, fool. And then I read Holly Goddard Jones, and she is a very normal, average lady in Western Kentucky, and decided that she always liked to write, and went and did a creative arts, one of those year-long programs, and wrote Girl Trouble, and it blew me fuck away. And I was like, oh, I'm being pretentious about creative writing degrees and certificates, because that book was fantastic. For me personally, but I consider it pretty high literature. Again, as far as people that I know alive today, she's one of the ones that rocked me a little bit. Like, I thought the reason I wasn't good is because we don't produce good writers anymore, but it turns out no, we're still producing some pretty good writers. Stephen King, to be fair, he was the one I read after Agatha Christie taught me that pretension. I was like, Stephen King, like, everyone, like, I know the movies, but maybe I'm fairly judging it's not real literature. And my wife, again, always been smarter than me, was like, Pete, do you realize how much of your worldview, the 21st century now, is actually just a creation of Stephen King? And she went through the list, like talking cars and this reference and that reference, and most of your not popular.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's Stephen King. I was like, wow, that's impressive. That's like Balzac, but for my time, like a creation. He's basically creating the background of popular culture. I read him, I was like, oh yeah, he's actually he's a really good writer.
Well, that's the thing that I find too, is like, I don't necessarily always love his stories, but I always love his writing.
I find his relationship to writing and reading fascinating. Like, he talks about it. Like, at the start of every book, there's a dear reader. And I almost enjoyed that as much as the books. That relationship he's got with his imaginary reader and what he thinks of reading and writing. Like I read On Writing. It's the only
that's what I was going to
how
ask
to
you if
write
you'd read
book I've
that.
ever read.
Yeah.
Because his relationship with the subject is just fascinating.
Yeah.
But no, he's pretty amazing dude. But yeah, Holly Goddard Jones, I highly recommend it. And thanks for the recommendation. I'll check him out. Is it worth paying up for a top tight end, or is it better playing a Ferguson, Njoku type, or using capital elsewhere? Depends what you mean by paying up. I think at tight end, it's either up or go down. And I love it when there's a Ferguson down because that's a guy I'll get. Pat Fairmouth is down right now, and I think that's a guy I'll go and get in that range as well. But yeah, you go up, you go down. And if you want a tight end, I think you trade into the top tier of tight end when you're trying to get points and you're going for Kelsey right now. He's a guy. Or you're trying to segue value into a little bit more of a stable asset, like an Andrews, even a Pitts, despite the hype curve we've seen, or a Brock Bowers who's dragging behind because of Pitts. Or Kittle, he's still in that category for me. I think that's just he's going to be stably good, and then he's going to they occasionally remind people they have something like not exactly a Kelsey, Gronkowski, Graham in their range of outcomes year to year, and suddenly you get this huge boom on them as well. And they're fairly stable at doing that. They have the longest careers fantasy wise and value arcs outside of quarterback. And I think that's a little underrated in terms of a place to park value when you, like the guy was saying earlier, trying to diversify from wide receiver. Tight end's always a solid place to go if you can't find picks. So yeah, it is worth it, but it's situation, price, and team build dependent. Zach, do you always go for them? Do you sometimes, or is it more?
I mean, it depends on the league. Like if I'm in an outhouse league where it's 1.75 premium, then I'm going to pay up for multiple top tight ends because they're actually scoring what quarterbacks do. If it's a regular league with no tight end premium, if one of those top tight ends falls, great. If they don't, I'm more than happy. You mentioned Ferguson and Njoku. Kittle is going right ahead of them and I think he's far more likely to be a top 4 or 5 than they are. So
that's what I was going to say to round out my answer here, right, man? It's like I look at where everything's at and I want to go up, but if I find a Kittle down, like I launch myself at trying to get them in trade. Outside of that, yeah, I just go grab shots of the Fergusons of the world, of whatever tight end you like from last year's rookie draft that wasn't Sam Laporta, or Kincaid because their value escalated. Or, I'm always rostering 3 or 4 that I hope can become something. Ferguson hit last year, but a whole bunch just miss and you cut.
Laporta wasn't escalated in rookie drafts, though. He was only escalated after he started playing. Yeah. But if you took Laporta in the second round of rookie drafts, you're very happy.
That's not what I meant to say. Yeah, you're
right.
Or insinuate. Should I buy Kittle in a start 9 where I have Laporta? Again, it's what's the trade? 1.5 isn't difference making, but it makes tight ends a little bit like Kittle, at least a little bit more interesting. Sure, it's a tanking team. Kittle's not so much a great target for a tanking team, but I do think he has windows in seasons.
He's saying that the team that he's buying Kittle from is tanking can get him for a second. I would. I'd like to have Kittle, and the Kittle is almost premium agnostic because he doesn't actually score his points through targets and receptions. He scores his points with yards after catch and touchdowns. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I would be trading to get Kittle. It doesn't matter that it's a 1.5 premium. The 1.5 premium is nice for Laporta. Kittle is nice to have because Kittle is a really solid tight end. It would be like you could start Kittle as your tight end 1 and then have Laporta as like a really high end flex play because of the 1.5 premium, and you'd be very happy.
Even in a start 9, Kittle's in that. Yeah, if his value drops to a second, you trade for him. Personally. I have Mayer, Musgraves as backups. So not backups, things that didn't work out. But yeah, I've got a few guys on the back end. Yeah, Mayer's unfortunate, but it's bad. Sorry. I kind of liked him last year as well. But there you go. Some teams just throw picks.
That's funny because their respective NFL teams have them as backups too.
Yeah.
Speed it up.
Scribbles. Yeah, man. What you doing? Okay. Unbelievable insight answers, guys. I don't know about that, but they're my thoughts. Thank you. And I gave the chat time to reload. Exactly. Appreciate you, Frank.
Appreciate you, Frank.
I've met him, It's pretty exciting.
I've been on
on a podcast.
I would say I've been on a podcast with Frank.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I know it's just weird. No one is biting. It's weird but understandable. Like, who do you think's getting an offer for DJ Moore? And like, Matt Harmon was talking about how great he was last. That's how most people play. Who's hyped? Who's popular? Yeah. Who's saying they should be drafted in the 4th round, not the 10th? That's how most people play fantasy, which is also one of the biggest advantages. Like, you now know you can go get DJ Moore pretty easily in your other leagues. That's interesting. And so just take it the other way. But I know what you mean. It's like he should be valued here. Unfortunately, we don't get to decide what our other league mates want to do, which is why we focus on, well, as Zach would say, the psychology, and I would say the hype. Go looking for who on your team's hyped. In my leagues, if you're stuck with a rookie doing nothing for like 3 weeks, they're basically dead. Well, that's an advantage you've noticed throughout your leagues. Again, wide receivers really shouldn't, quote unquote, kick off till the last 6 weeks. I bought into N'Keal Harry after the first 6 weeks of his rookie season. I shouldn't have, it turns out, but I still stand by the process. I actually advised someone to do that, and he did. And I still feel bad about it, but I still think it's a solid process because I really think it's those last 6 weeks, and you can catch some significant increases there. And be wary about the first 6 weeks with wide receivers. Case in point, like Terrence Marshall had some interesting background volume stats the first 3-4 weeks that people were like talking themselves into. And again, why I still staple my college profile to him. I just like, this is positive, but I'm staying on the low side at least until we get to those last 6 weeks. And the middle of the season is where it all fell apart for Marshall for those background volume stats. I was not out ever on Ayuk. Let the record show. Don't worry. I've marked that L. Don't worry. A mega elite. Not so far. But yeah, he's pretty good. I'm trying to win. I have Kyler, Aaron Rodgers, maybe? Caleb, Brooks, Benson, McLaurin, Metcalf, Ayuk, Laporta, Neighbors, Reed, McLaurin, Thomas Jr., Rashid Rice, Worthy. You're not built like a competitive team. You're built like a decent dynasty team should be.
The fact that you hate Anthony Richardson so bad that you went to Aaron Rodgers, you went to the 43-year-old quarterback with a torn Achilles instead of going, oh yeah, the fun new.
That was perfectly natural as well. That was not me that was not me intentionally hating. That's literally what I thought. Yeah, I've completely blanked him out. Just a blank space where those initials lie. But yeah, I would say your team's built. It's a good dynasty team, but you're not built to win. You don't have Kelsey. You don't have CMC. You haven't invested in older guys are guaranteed to be more likely to score points this year. That's fine, by the way. But if you really want to push for it, this fact here you could easily use. I would wait till the season. But
Genji, this team is so. When I first started doing dynasty analysis was like 2015, 2016, and like the big funny thing to say was, look at this, like guys are drafting all like the new hotness and they're trying to win the beauty contest. Like that's kind of what this team is. Not that it's necessarily bad, but like Anthony Richardson is like the new hotness. Caleb Williams is the new hotness. Brooks and Benson are the top running backs in a class that doesn't have top running backs. Jaleel McLaughlin is somebody that I've heard Derek Brown, tout a bunch. He's still like the running back 4 in Denver, even though he was pretty efficient on his touches last year. Metcalf is good. Ayuk is good. Laporta is good. Neighbors, I think, is good, but still like new hotness. Jaden Reed is being overdrafted, even though he's good. He's not great. It's not. This is not a bad team, but it's so much like Dontavian Wicks, Keaton Mitchell, Xavier Worthy. Like, and I'm part of the Xavier Worthy hype machine, but it's still like this team is going to win the beauty contest, but you still got to play the games.
Yeah, I think it's pretty ugly, actually. In the sense, and competitive teams are meant to be ugly from a pure dynasty building mindset. But you walk in the middle. But the number of young players here who are deeply disappointing and lose value if they don't score points, like young players who need to score points are not competitive build. They're also not a building build. Like, if Rashid Rice struggles this season, his value is going to drop to like what Michael Hardman was a couple of years ago, which is Thomas Jr. Like, I like him in where he's going in rookie drafts, but if he doesn't do this something this season, like we said about rookies, he's going to drop in value. Like Metcalf is fine. I think he's a little undervalued, actually, considering his range of outcomes based on what he's done, but like he's not hyped. Ayuk, like we just talked about, that it's all you guys. You can't find 5 other people in your league who are going to now believe that top 4 draft capital, which is fine for you, but that means he's more points than he is value, and he's still young. If you're looking at young players who need to score points, that's where I get squishy. I think it's a really good team, don't get me wrong, lots of upside here, but they have to hit their upside or the value goes away. Your value isn't secure, so you're not building. You're not a competitive team because you don't have the proven guys who are a little ugly because of age. You have the middle of the road guys who need to score points, but they're young. You see what I mean? So I don't think it's a competitive team. I also don't think it's a building team, which I want to be going in one direction or the other, typically. So I think you have a little more uncertainty here than your description.
But again, by having by having a sexy team, you have the ability to move players. Like that's the one nice thing that having players that are sexy, it's because people like them. People are expecting them to. So
the opposite of DJ Moore. They're excited to trade for them, and that's what I would be thinking at with this team. Can I move it? And you pick which direction you want to go, but I want to move in one of those directions. As outside of that, really solid dynasty roster. I'm sure it'd score really well on those grade your league things because they're sexy and high. Richard Davis, 12 team start 9-1 QB, traded DJ Moore, Jake Ferguson, Zamir. 26 first, a second, a third, minor, 25 second for Puka. Yeah, it's a whole bag of stuff. Some of it's interesting for like a top 12 dynasty wide receiver. So you also got a little 112 and Lockett and Tillman somehow thrown in. Puka by himself probably should have done it. So I think he did very well.
Yeah.
So that's a start 8 with a kick, especially in the start 8. Puka's the prize there.
Yeah, you want to consolidate and the fact that you got Puka. Hold on.
And a first.
Yeah, Puka and a first. Like let's go.
Yes. Start 9, 12 team. Well, especially again, start 9. I want my starters to have slightly higher floors in general, but that's me. It's not start 8 like this fella, but start 9 is still pretty high. I normally play in start 11 leagues, so anything above that, I'm already thinking more studs. That's why I'm in here asking if I should trade for running backs. Yeah, I definitely think you should. I think it's a great year to try and win. I think it's a great year to try and trade for running backs to win, but you're not going to like the guys you'll probably get and you should target. ETN, maybe. Here's the shiny one on the list. Outside of that, they're all going to look a little ugly from a dynasty mindset. But yeah, I definitely think you could do that, and it's a solid direction to move. Just do it in a way that doesn't kill your future. You're trying to trade this year for this year. You're not trying to trade your 25 and 26 picks. If you keep them and you push to win this year with those players as a sexy value you're trading away, solid dynasty competitive build, in my opinion. If you get good trades. Henry's a good target too. Diggs, yeah, for sure.
He's saying he's not
players this year.
He's saying he's not doing that. He's not trading for those guys.
Yeah, I have to. I think they'd be good on the list. But if you don't want to go ETN, maybe CMC at the top, Travis Kelce, guys losing value because of age for building teams, but still remarkably interesting for anyone trying to win. And then you go down a little bit at running back, the Aaron Jones type play.
Yeah.
And Kittle, tight end as a composite to Kelsey. A little easier to trade for, still got the range of outcomes, and still more of a competitive build. And you can do that with the sexiness on your roster without giving up your future picks. Easily build a very competitive team out of that. Rashee Rice finishes inside the top 36 and only has 2 or 3 games inside the top 12 because of long touchdowns. Do you really feel that much different than McCall Hardman in his third year? I don't think so. I don't think that's the likely expectation for Rashee Rice, especially since his legal trouble seems to be becoming something of a wash, although I haven't checked in on that. But I definitely don't have Tyreek expectations. And so, yeah, there's McCall Hardman year 3, and there's the upside of actually a solid weekly starter, and he's in there somewhere. But if he hit that bottom end of expectation, really think his value holds at the end of next season? You think he's more than McCall Hardman was after that third year? I don't know. And again, and just to highlight the potential flaw of some of your players. Whereas if that's, well, who did you mention? Stefon Diggs, drastically loss of dynasty value. Maybe his last season where he's valued at all. But his bottom range of outcomes is a top 24 wide receiver if he's healthy. So he's definitely helping a competitive team. Whereas Rashee Rice's flaw in terms of this year expectations is a lot lower than that, and his value goes with it. Whereas Diggs' value is guaranteed to go, but yeah. Thoughts on Roman Wilson? I think Zach already covered you on that one earlier, and I still remain in the same place. I don't have a high opinion of him, but I have a low opinion of him, and I hate chasing the maybes. But again, it's a maybe from my perspective, where Zach's talking about what he sees on tape and how that fits into the Patriots, which is definitely part of the game I can't do. So I just listen to him on.
Well, no, he's Roman Wilson is Pittsburgh, but I would hang on to him right. I would hang on to him right now because I think you'd be able to get a 25-second for him at any time in this offseason. And so, don't trade him yet. See if he ends up he may flash in the preseason. You may get
a hype bubble.
Yeah. So keep your option open, Andrew, to trading him. But you may end up getting more than a 25-second for him if there's some hype that builds, or you may be able to pair him with something and get more than what you would. A 25-second is a kind of a shrug. I agree with Genji about Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice is not ever going to be McCall Hardman. McCall Hardman never did it. McCall Hardman was very fast, and that was it.
Okay, but you're talking about play. I'm talking about his value arc in Dynasty. People are really excited for him, significantly excited for him after that one good year, and I had to defend against a whole bunch of vacated targets arguments. I was like, that's not going to happen. I think Rashee Rice's median expectation is higher than McCall Hardman's ever was, but I'm saying if he tanks this year, if he did,
I mean, he probably is not going to play much this year. The way his, I guess I don't really know, but yeah.
But yeah, let's say he plays half the season and never has a particularly decent game. I definitely think there's a death to his value in his range after this season. If he does, especially if he misses significant time, it would just be one of those sleeper picks. Well, low range sleeper picks. Well, no, that's too low. But you know what I mean. Have Laporta outscored Kelsey already. Why would I want Kelsey? Okay. Bizarre to me, but whatever. Rashee Rice average over 13 points per game as a rookie. Pull out the list who did that. Don't make me talk about over underlines, Genji. Ridiculous. I already said I had a good rookie season. I was talking about if he had a bad season, what happens to you? Whereas who's 26? A 26-year-old wide receiver who's already been in the top 12 once, already been in the top 24. DJ Moore has a top 24 season again. His value doesn't go nowhere. If Rashee Rice doesn't have a significant season, his value drops a little bit. And as a young player, that's a rough place to be in. You're making a points per game bet on a younger player. Not that, to Zach's point, not that we should expect him to do that, because he was pretty decent as a rookie with a pretty decent rookie profile. But I'm talking about a range of outcomes here. What happens if? On the low range is that's disappointing. I can't trade Rashee Rice for as much as I could of a year ago. Chase Brown or Zach Moss? Which side are you guys on?
Whichever one stays healthy. It's probably Moss to start, but like
It's one of those running backs I grab after Gus Edwards because they could easily be in there.
Yeah.
Solid running back. So I only have a favorite, whichever one's available when I'm picking that level of running back. But I think Zach's got that's a good point. Like Moss, if you need certainty, especially early, whereas Chase Brown's got the upside of maybe taking over, being more of a thing than Zach Moss has been. So yeah, that's probably the best answer. How's that bizarre? He's 36 and I think it's bizarre 36? To look. I think it's bizarre to look at the history of tight end and see Gronkowski at the top of it, to see Jimmy Graham at the top of it, and say, I want to be the guy who expects those guys not to be good. I think that's a little weird. Is Sam Laporta ranked higher than him in Dynasty? Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's reasonable to expect you're going to get more years out of Sam Laporta. But the idea Travis Kelce isn't a points per game bet this year because tight end be old, that's bizarre to me. It's bizarre to me why you'd fade old tight ends if you're thinking of being competitive and looking for points, because those guys do that. That's what's bizarre to me, to be clear. Not that Travis Kelce should be more valuable than Sam Laporta. I didn't trade Sam Laporta for Travis Kelce. It's like, go get Travis Kelce. If you can start one in a flex and one, because Sam Laporta, to your point, is so great, and Travis Kelce as your tight end or as that flex as well, you're scoring more points. And you said you wanted a competitive build. And Travis Kelce, to your argument, that's the way people feel about Travis Kelce more often than not right now. And if you're looking for points, there's a definitely good player playing in definitely good prime of his career, who's definitely more likely to score above average points, who's falling in value because tight ends be old. Like that's a competitive player to target. How's that not? You want a player who's easier to trade for, still likely to score points for a team that wants points. That adds up to me. As a Rice header, I also think it will be hard for him to repeat 102 targets in 2024 with new weapons. I know. That's a little unfair. I would expect him to elevate his role in his second year outside of the missed time thing. He had a good rookie year. He had lower-ish draft capital. We're not talking first-round player. I can't remember what exact round, but my expectations would be that he increases in terms of his peak after his rookie year, in terms of his team relative volume, not in terms of necessarily fantasy outcome. I'm not saying therefore he gets more likely to be a top 12 guy, but I do think he works his way more into the team volume than segues left or goes downhill because of that non-first round draft capital. Again, if we can remember the crisscrossing lines in terms of draft capital expectation. I think the question with Rice really is how much time does he miss and what is his true range of outcomes? I saw him as a top 24 guy upside, like regular DJ Moore, very solid wide receiver 15. I thought that was the upside. I've never had a strong feeling if you ever thought that was too low or too high, Zach. Because I know you liked him a lot as a rookie and was proven right year one. So. Would you have higher expectations than that as a likely expectation?
Well, so it's going to be funky because it's not just what he is doing on the field. Like that to me is a big issue with Rashee Rice. Is if it was just him being on the field and being in an offense with Kelce and Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown. Like, yeah, fine. I think he's going to do what Rashee Rice has done. Where you've got potential to miss games, you got potential to be just a chucklehead off the field. Like, I think that colors some of what happens on the field too. Like, if I'm a coach and I can't trust you not to do stupid stuff off the field, I think that eventually you get to a point where you're like, nah, heck with that guy. And so it's not necessarily for me. I think Rashee Rice is good. I think he is a good player. I think he'll drive targets. Whether or not he is mature enough to stick around, I mean, that's that's kind of questionable.
Fair enough.
But
those guys got at 32, not 36. Okay. Yeah. Apart from Gronkowski, when he came back, was still pretty good. True, it was with Tom Brady when his fed touchdowns. I think you're comparing individuals in a small sample directly through a single data point, which in this case is age. I think the overlying signal is that tight ends are still pretty good when they get over 30. I don't think players drop off in talent slowly either. It should be a drastic increase, but I don't think we should create expectations saying, I know this is the year this player is going to, what is mostly a random drop off in overall volume, especially looking at the team. The team's still built to be Kelsey to be the lead receiving option on the team. Like, what are we talking about here? Only people who don't like Rice are the people that were wrong on him pre-draft. Seems circular. You didn't like him, he did well, therefore you were wrong on him. Yeah, that logic adds up. But you can't have been wrong on him because he did well by liking him. You know what I mean? There's no other option. Why was Kittle being persistently cheap for so long? Partly because of what Zach's saying. He doesn't score points like a normal tight end. And also, there's a per game argument in that he's missed lots of time, and so people miss the fact that when he's on the field, he's still Kittle. But he was also a difficult start every week because they do this whole he's starting, but then he doesn't play. Kind of he's that player, and so people feel disappointing in the player when really it's I guess a real NFL concern or a team way of playing it.
It's also a misunderstanding of whether you want guys to score 30 points one week and then 6 points one week or score 15 points every week. And the answer is you want the first guy. Because the 15 points a week isn't going to win you anything. But the 30-point week will.
Right.
So
I mean, I want every range. That's the thing about range of outcomes. Technically, everything is in a player's range of outcomes because we have no definite identifiers. I'm saying a reasonable range of outcomes for Rashee Rice is between wide receiver 15 and wide receiver 36. Sans legal trouble. If you have it from 12 to 24, I think you're a lot higher than I am. But again, there's a lot of Venn diagram crossover there where we have agreement. I don't find anything particularly in his rookie season or anything particularly in his college profile that suggests that it should be moved up that many. Well, we've got a 10 in my imaginary, your range of outcomes, a 10 spot difference on either end. I mean, that's where I'm at. Wide receiver 15 to wide receiver 24 based on historical comparisons of rookie profiles and what he did in his rookie year. I'm not going to bandy which narratives I prefer over yours because I don't really proliferate narratives. I don't have one to bandy. Numbers don't lie. Top 36. I mean, yeah, but so was Drake London his rookie year. Again, I'm not just looking at that number. And I like the way you try to parody me, but you've held me to the fire twice now and been pretty flippant about it. So I'm not going to take it. Yeah, top 36 is an indicator, but it doesn't mean everyone who finishes in the top 36 in the rookie year finishes in the top 12. And if you want to marginalize my research on that, that's fine. But I don't have to sit here and listen to it after you've been pretty flippant with your answers to what I thought was a fairly reasonable range of outcomes on Rashee Rice. So Frank in the chat, the receiver got not getting talked about enough on the Chiefs is Pacheco. I think that's an interesting just positional play on the Chiefs. The Chiefs feels like one of those offense where it's a great offense, so we keep looking for the player with the upside. And it's really been Kelsey for this long. But we've had so many come through where we see that upside. Remember, no one took over the Tyreek Hill top 12 role. It doesn't need it, is the thing. It's one of the things about Patrick Mahomes' stats. It's remarkably difficult outside of actually advanced passing stats to show why he's so remarkably different than many other passers in the league. Because his fantasy points are actually somewhat disappointing when you compare him to the majority of difference-making scoring quarterbacks because he's not doing it through rushing. He's basically doing it from above-average touchdowns, which is a little Aaron Rodgers-y in his prime, not now, obviously, but not exactly because he also gets a pretty decent chunk of passing yards, but not phenomenal like a whole bunch of passing quarterbacks. It's actually his points are actually hidden in the weeds a little bit, and yet we know he has them. And it's one of those combinations of the team has had elite fantasy players like Kelsey and Tyreek, but it's also been able to do it without them. And that's where I come out with Rashee Rice and Pacheco. I think, I mean, it's not outlandish to their range of outcomes, but I don't think they have to be elite for the Chiefs to be what they have been. And so I always seem to come out a little bit more lukewarm than others. I think Pacheco's a solid option at ADP, and so is Rice, to be clear. But I'm not therefore going to see that there has to be another elite option on the Chiefs. So I think the Chiefs will just tick along just fine without a Tyreek level fantasy outcome, or for that matter, without a Kelsey level fantasy outcome. If he goes too, I think the Chiefs offense will still be able to tick along because of the way it's built, as it were. It spreads it out and still finds points throughout the diffusion because it's a good team, well ran with decent players. You don't have to have that elite player to succeed in that way, but maybe that's a little bit optimistic about the Andy Reid scheme. What do you think, Zach? Like, could it survive not having a Kelsey and still not have a top 12 overall fantasy outcome outside of Mahomes?
I mean, I think that it would end up being the years when Brady had Gronk get hurt, where like then all of a sudden I think that was like a James White year, or so it's there's still going to be a viable offense, and like Pacheco probably gets a bump, like that they still have talented players. It's not, so I think that's there's like a funky razor's edge of vacated targets versus like hierarchy of players. So like I don't think vacated targets are a thing, but I do think that talented players are a thing. And if Kelsey is more talented than XYZ, or more talented and the system is built to exploit that talent, and then if you don't have that talent, you're not just going to plug in another tight end and say be Travis Kelsey, because that's not going to happen. So what you do is you go, okay, who are my best players now, and how do I accomplish being good going forward? So I'm like, I think they're still, and I think Mahomes is good, but like you said, he's good in a funky, like he's good in a different way than some of the other fantasy scoring quarterbacks are.
Neat. Drakeland dreams of averaging 30 points per game. All right. If that's your over underline, then you also have to own that, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Cool. Pete doesn't like pushback or being wrong. I don't like being wrong. Also, you stating something isn't the same as it being true, but cool. And I think I've been pretty resilient. Like I seek out disagreement. But okay.
I mean, you have me here.
Trust the numbers. Trust that one number. All right. Show me the history. Go on, Gedgy. Show me your research. Oh, wait. It's funny that Pacheco is probably a top 12 running back by the stats, and no one sees him. Again, that's another attaching a good number to a pretty decent player who did pretty decent last year in order to elevate him. He wasn't a top 12 in points per game, I don't think. Was he?
He was pretty close. Pretty good last year, Pete.
It just that top 12 feels numbering. But yeah, he's been pretty good. But again, there's a reasonable expectation for him to be that level of player.
14 in points per game.
There you go. Yeah, it's pretty good. By ADP, seems like a pretty good pick. I don't think I have anything here.
He's a much better Scott Fishbowl pick than a regular PPR pick, for what that's worth.
No, I don't have that in this one. Well, that one's going to take much. All right. Yeah, I think Pacheco's a decent ADP pick. Again, you're putting him in the Joe Mixon range, just to be clear. Like I said, I think he easily could finish in the top 12, but he's not providing the McCaffrey, Kamara, and even that 1 year with Derrick Henry difference-making points. But I think he's a really solid starter.
Right.
And ADP disagrees somewhat with that, but I think I'm mostly talking Dynasty ADP, which is a little unfair. I can't remember what he's doing in redraft or best ball, where he might be a little more respected. Yeah.
I don't know. Hey, Pete.
Yes, sir.
Look over there.